In this short video clip, we are going to cover the chapter 22, sections 1 and 2, and we are going to cover the topic of fiscal policy and public finances. Particularly, we will talk a lot about the UK and the European Union. So let's go to my full desktop. So we start here, chapter 22. First of all, some notions, fiscal policy. The fiscal policy seeks to control the aggregate demand, and that is particularly done by altering the balance between government spending and taxation. So let me go there. Yes. So what is the role of the fiscal policy? Particularly correcting a fundamental disequilibrium, for instance, a response to COVID, a response to a terrorist attack, a response to a stock exchange crash, etc. So we have stabilization policies. We are going to cover them here. The idea is that when we have a response to COVID-19, so therefore the government start spending much more. So in doing that, it try to stop the economy from falling, right, and support the sectors. Otherwise, it can happen like a domino effect in which the business cycle start being very volatile. So and also these stabilization policies can influence aggregate supply, particularly with aggregate supply or supply side policies. Fundamentally, for instance, the United Kingdom has used um, um, many projects to enhance things such as trains, airports, enhancement of roads, etc., in order to influence aggregate supply. So, what are the government and finance terminology? So, we have budget deficits and surpluses. So, a deficit is when a government expenditure is higher than what the government is collecting in terms of taxes, and surpluses is the other way around. Yes, when the government is collecting more in taxes than what the government is spending. The general government deficit surplus. So we have the general government and the national and general government debt. So in general, when we look at the deficits and surplus, we can look at the local government or the central government, which is the general government deficit surplus, or we can go look at the national deficit surplus as well. So the national looks not just at the central government, yes, but it looks as well at the local governments of the country. The national debt and general government debt, that is exactly the difference between both of them. The former takes into account all local governments and the central government, whereas the general government debt takes into account only the central government debt. So these fiscal policies are linked to the business cycle. So when the business cycle is going down, so we have fiscal policies to stabilize the economy and the public finances. So we have as well structural deficits or surplus. This is going to be covered here in this slide. So we have here the tax revenues. In the y-axis, we have government expenditure and taxes. And as a result of that, here we have in the x-axis national output or national income. So here we have in this slide the national income and the size of the public sector deficit or surplus. That can be measured by comparing the tax revenue with the government expenditure, including benefits. So here we have the deficit, the size of the deficit, and here we have the size of the surplus. So we can see clearly here what are the sizes of both national income and the sense of the public sector deficit and surpluses. When taxes equal the government expenditure, so we are in a situation in which we are balancing out both government expenditure and tax revenue. I think that is the point at which usually the political right wants to achieve. Yes, I think sometimes I believe that they want to achieve this too quickly, such as in these very moments. I do not think that back in March 2021 was the right time to increase taxes. But I think time will tell us whether that decision was actually correct or not. So, another point that I would like to cover here is the fiscal stance and the state of the economy. So here we have the UK public sector spending, receipts, and borrowing as a percentage of GDP. So here we have the net borrowing. You can see how the net borrowing increased after the crisis of 2007 and 8, and how it also increased as a percentage of GDP because of the pandemic. Fortunately, I think we need a little bit more of data here in order to compare rightly what is the spending and receipts as a percentage of GDP. But indeed, you can see here how, as a percentage of GDP, the net borrowing has increased. During my previous video, I covered in more detail what is the current circumstances of the UK economy in terms of fiscal policy. And there are more details in it about public sector spending. These are the current receipts. So, as a result of the pandemic, you can see how the current receipts decreased, and as a result of the pandemic as well, in green, you can see here how the total expenditure increased to 8%. Okay, this is the section 21.2, the use of the fiscal policy. So very quickly, we have the automatic fiscal stabilizers. This means that they can be automatic. So when there is a low business cycle, when the economy is slowing down, so we have an automatic stabilizer in order to try to push up the economy, to support the economy. So we have tax stabilizers, the fact that the taxes can be reduced in order to let the businesses and the people to spend more. We are going to talk a little bit about the tax stabilizer because as a result of the multiplicator, we covered the topic of multiplicator at the beginning of the session. Perhaps it does not have the same effect on government expenditure. So, what are the benefits of the stabilizers? The fact that it smooths the business cycles of the economy, and they have been proved especially useful when we have like serious issues in terms of very unexpected shocks in the economy, such as the pandemic or such as the terrorist attacks in the United States, etc. So when situations like that come, there are unexpected shocks to the economy. So I think tax stabilizers have been proved to be very opportune. So we have as well that as a result of this effectiveness of automatic stabilizers, we sometimes have adverse supply side effects. So, in terms of adverse supply side effects, we have the cases in which it's too late for the economy to adjust to the automatic stabilizer. So, for instance, if we have received some information that the economy is slowing down today as a government, that information is probably coming too late, since we need to collect information and wait up until the report is prepared. That is going to take a lot of time because data needs to be collated, data management. We need to prepare the reports, etc. So, by the time that the report finally arrives to the Prime Minister or the Chancellor for Exchequer, is going to be actually um, a bit late. So, and also we have the problem of the fiscal drag, the fact that taxes as well pose a problem to the economy. We covered during the previous session how, for instance, we are at historical high taxes in the UK, and that creates a problem for the economy as do not facilitate the environment for the businesses to invest more, and decreases a bit as well the competitiveness in comparison with other countries. We have as well, in terms of the use of fiscal policy, the discretionary fiscal policy. Discretionary fiscal policy is being taken, as the name says, uh, by deliberate changes in fiscal policy to influence aggregate demand. So, in terms of discretionary fiscal policy, there are two alternatives since we only have two variables: government expenditure and taxes. The first one is changing government expenditure, so you can increase or decrease government expenditure, or changing T, which is increasing or decreasing taxes. However, in terms of increasing or decreasing taxes, when the government decreases taxes, only one portion of the that disposable income that increases goes actually to well, not disposable, that portion of the money that the households are saving, just a small portion goes to disposable income. In other words, when the government decreases the government expenditure, so we have the situation in which households save more, for instance, or in that case, they send the money to the bank and they do not spend the money. So, as you can see, that is a withdrawal from the economy, from the circular flow of income, and the money will not increase by the multiplicator, yes, by rotating in the circular flow of income, the GDP, yes. So GDP will not increase as when we use government expenditure. Government expenditure is an injection will be going directly into the businesses, and then the multiplicator will increase more than when changing taxes. Yes, so that is why we have here this equation in which the actual multiplicator of the through the decrease in taxes is less than the normal multiplicator from government expenditure by 1. So if this multiplicator is 5, meaning that if I increase government expenditure by 100 in 5 years, that the circular flow of income will increase in 5 times. That would be a multiplicator of 5. The initial increment in government expenditure in the case of taxes will be only 4, as you can see here the multiplicator of a policy through taxes. It only decreases, it always decreases the power of, or decreases the power of the multiplicator by 1. Here we have the example of a cut in taxes, just one lump sum. This has been one of the proposals. I think I advocate for this only one shock for the economy, a single one, rather than a long-lasting effect in the increase of taxes. So here we have an increment in taxes times the marginal propensity to consume domestically. So as you can see, we keep here. These are the withdrawals. Remember, as withdrawals, we have saving taxes and imports. Yes, and yes, so we have this situation in which we cut the taxes, so therefore households in the economy withdraw less money from the circular flow of income. So we have this parallel decrease of the withdrawals to the red line that you are seeing on your screen. This is different from a cut in taxes. This is interesting since there is research analyzing whether a wealth tax is going to be a good measure in order to decrease the government deficit. The situation when we have a cut in taxes is the situation in which we have a different slope in the withdrawals. So we pass here, as you can see, from W1 to W2, a situation in which we cut the taxes. The opposite will be an increment that, as this figure shows, would be like a movement, like well, anti-clockwise here to the left, in the case in which we increase taxes in a moment in which we have a deficit. So the size then of this change is going to be again the same. However, when the economy carries on moving ahead with the time, so we have like a higher increment in the revenue because of these tax increments. So I think that is the situation in which we are now, and the government is planning, as we covered before, to find that the equilibrium between taxes and government expenditure by 2024-2025. So also in terms of discretionary policy, there are problems of forecasting and the magnitude of the effect. So it's very difficult to determine what will be the effects that we are going to have in the economy as a result of the fiscal policy. We have effects of other injections and withdrawals, so that makes a little bit as well difficult to forecast what is going to happen. You could see in the Office for Budget Responsibility report many corrections in terms of their forecasts, and I think that is a problem in terms of economic forecasting. The fact that you can forecast, but the government carries on increasing or decreasing taxes, or increasing or decreasing government expenditure, and the economy also carries on receiving different type of shocks, not just economic shocks, but political shocks, health shocks, and well, etc., social shocks in general. Another issue from the fiscal policy is that it creates crowding out. If the government borrows too much money from the economy, so it will crowd out investors. So for investors, interest rates are going to be more dirty. That crowds out the investment from businesses as funds are transferred from the private sector to the public sector. Here we have the monetary effects of fiscal policy. Here we have a vertical inelastic money supply in the right hand side panel, and here we have a money demand. This is the money market, and here we have the goods market. So here we have withdrawals and injections. Remember that injections is an horizontal line because the injections are believed to be exogenous, meaning that they are affected independently from the model. Whereas withdrawals are indeed affected or are dependent on the variables of the model. That is income, taxes, savings, and imports. Right. So here we have, therefore, that as a result of an expansionary fiscal policy, W is going to shift, J is going to shift upwards. Yes. So an expansionary fiscal policy means that G will increase. You remember that the J injections are government expenditure, investment and exports. So you can see how here the economy passed from a national income point Y1 to Y2, an increment in the national income, and that is the effect of the fiscal policy. As a result of this increment in the of the fiscal policy, we have also an effect on the demand for money. As a result of the expansionary fiscal policy and higher national income, people is going to start demanding more money. Remember that the demand for money is not the amount of money that people would like to have, but the amount of money that they would like to have with them in liquid assets, meaning in assets that are very easily transferable into cash. So as you can see, as a result of that, interest rates will increase. And I think that will be the situation in which we have crowd out many businesses from investing as interest rates increase. On this slide, we have the general government deficit and surpluses and debt as a percentage of GDP. Particularly, it's very interesting to see websites with the debt as a percentage of GDP for many economies in the world. So I would advise you then to visit some of these websites to just review how the world economies are behaving in terms of debt as a percentage of GDP. That is a huge topic, and it's a topic that can cause another financial crisis, as all governments in the world have increased their debt, and that can cause a serious problem if interest rates actually increase. So, accommodating for an increase in money supply generated by the increment in money demand, yes, as the economy is growing, so we can see that in the long run also we have this shift from R2 to the previous R1. This can happen in the situation in which the expansionary fiscal policy increase the businesses in the economy and is not a situation in which actual um, the actual increment in output is causing overheating in the economy. In that scenario, probably money supply will not increase, as banks would prefer not to increase their credits, and less the central bank will try to increase money supply. Contrary, so yes, this is the accommodating increase in money supply in a situation in which the market still can afford to carry on increasing from Y1 to Y2. So, so as you can see here, the size of the multiplier is a key aspect to take into account, because the size of the multiplier is going to tell the government what is the right measure for of action. Yes, what is the size of the government expenditure that it needs in order to tackle a certain issue, and the accelerator effects as the economy passes from certain level of growth to another place of another level of growth. So the multiplier effect is something that, well, that obviously we will need to take into account to like raise recommendations in terms of fiscal policy. We have random shocks. Random shocks is another issue that are connected to fiscal policy. For instance, the 2001 attack on the World Trade Center and the COVID-19 pandemic. These are random shocks that we could not forecast, and economists are just not able to forecast. The explosion of a volcano, and well, many catastrophes that are originated by just natural disasters, and well, other situations such as wars. Sometimes we cannot forecast at what extent we are going to have a war in the near future. Well, that is debatable, right? Because just at some point, for instance, we can say with certain degree of probability that certain country would like to invade another, right? Because it needs a certain preparation. But a political turmoil sometimes is not as evident as we can imagine, right? So so we have problems in the fiscal policy. So there are various time lags since the information or the data is collected and is transformed into information and reports and finally arrives to the person that is in capacity to take decisions. It can take very long time. The timing of the annual budget is as well very important. The situation, the current macroeconomic situation, a policy that might be destabilizing is as well an issue in terms of taxes. For instance, the situation with the triple dog for the pensions in the UK, a situation that can backfire to the government and probably enact a new government that is a little bit less serious in terms of keeping the public finances in responsible levels. And we can see here how the fiscal policy is stabilizing or destabilizing. So we have the path of no intervention here in blue. The idea is that we can decrease the volatility of this blue line and achieve something that we have something like what we have here on this brown line. Yes, soften that business cycle so people will suffer less and will feel less euphoric when the things are going right. So what we want to avoid is the path in red. The path in red can be achieved as well if the policy is, for instance, conducted too late with very old information. For instance, that will be a debacle. Sometimes policy makers take decisions that are not uh, good for the current economic circumstances, such as, for instance, increasing taxes back in March 2021, or since or another policies that sometimes they cannot see very well what are going to the lasting results, such as decreasing or taking out the triple lock for the pensions in the UK. So there are some policies that needs to take time to in order for the policymaker to have like a rational understanding of whether that policy was good or not. In that case, there are many. In this case, policies in general have certain level of uncertainty. Yes, and sometimes structural damage or structural enhancement for the economies. Okay, guys, that is all for fiscal policy, and I hope to see you during my live lecture.